Hey, credits! Let's go! Oh, I'm a happy man right now. All right, cool. Good game. All right, let's talk about it. First things first, though. We gotta look at this. The first thing is that the bottom center of the screen says that we've beaten 4 games in 2024, and 451 since we started doing this in 2020. Those numbers are, I don't even know where those came from. We've now beaten 5 games in 2024 and 452 since we started doing this in 2020. Let's go. All right. Let's talk about Mortal Shell. Let's talk about the good things first. So this is a Souls-like, and there are a few things about Souls-likes that are incredibly important. The first one is just straight-up combat. And I thought the day-to-day, enemy-to-enemy combat in this game was very Souls-like. It wasn't too complicated. It had a couple of little frills, but it was mostly very Souls-like in that it was pretty straightforward and satisfying. Very satisfying, I would say. So as far as like the foundation, how's the combat? Good. The way that the enemies were balanced felt right. It was challenging, especially toward the beginning. Just fighting just regular enemies was rough at the beginning, and then that's a very common thing for Souls-like. So no change there. That was good. It was nailed. They nailed that part. The boss fights. The boss fights for a 10-hour game, which is probably about how long this took me. I would say that this game had the right number of boss fights. It didn't have a ton, but it had enough for the runtime. It had a good amount. We were kind of always working towards that next boss fight, so that flow was good. It was well paced, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Between those boss fights, the levels between, they were great. What else? The level design is another thing about Souls-likes, that if you don't nail the levels design, then you're going to have a problem having a really good Souls-like, right? Same with combat, same with boss fights. So level design's the third thing. This game, that's probably the most notable thing about Mortal Shell, is the level design. It's not labyrinthine like Steel Rising or like Dark Souls 3. It's like a bowl of spaghetti. More kind of like Demon Souls, where it is like paths will wind into one another. It is very easy to get lost. I got lost a bunch, and I'm pretty good with my sense of direction in games like this, and I got lost a lot where I was like, I don't know if I've been here or not. All this stuff looks the same. And the whole game didn't look the same, to be clear, but in the areas, when you're just looking at like a wooded area like this, yeah, a lot of it starts to look the same, and you don't know when you've been in the same, like, you don't know when you've circled back. I would think I would be like, I've been going for a while, man. I keep, like, I must be getting to a boss soon, and then I'd realize I was right back in front of where I started. Like, that happened a couple of times. And that's not a complaint. I think confusing and very complex level design can be a very good thing. It gives you that sense that you're like in that world and you could kind of go in any direction and find something. This game is designed more like Demon Souls than I think any other non-FromSoft Souls-like I've played, where it's very much like you can kind of do it in any order. A lot of the Souls-likes that I played a bunch of Souls-likes in 2023. Steel Rising, Thymesia, Lies of P, there were others. Blasphemous 2, and none of them really had that feeling like you could kind of do whatever, whenever. They were much more linear. This is not linear at all. And I liked that. It gives you that sense of exploration. It's fun. I think those were probably the main things that I really loved. And overall, I would say that I loved this game. I would say yes, I loved this game. It was very good. Souls-likes, I'm very easy to please. So I mean, I've loved almost every Souls-like, or I at least really liked almost every Souls-like I've played. There are a couple of notable exceptions. We won't get into that now, but I would say, yeah, this is definitely a good Souls-like, especially for the runtime, because it's hard to make a game that's this short still really challenging. And this game, well, this game does that thing that all Souls-likes do, and this isn't a complaint either, where at the very beginning it is hard as balls, and then as you progress it gets easier and easier, and at a certain point you crest this wave. It usually comes after a really tough boss, and you crest this wave, and suddenly, like, the game is, like, way easier, suddenly. And that happened for me after, like, the third boss. And that sounds early, but there's not that many bosses in this game. So I would say that was about a third of the way through the game. Maybe closer to half. And that's a good feeling, because you can go back to those earlier areas. And in a game like this that's so intertwined upon itself, yeah, you got to go back to the beginning area a few times, and you just lay waste to those bitches at that point. And I enjoy that. That's fun. That's a good feeling. It makes you feel like you've grown, you've progressed, not only because your weapons are stronger and you got better gear, but because you're just better at the game. You know, the game, in order to beat those bosses, it does a good job of teaching you to get better. The bosses do a good job of teaching you to get better. So yeah, that's a lot of good things to say about this game. I do have a couple of negatives. One in particular. Two in particular. One is, well, I'll just go over them. This game is buggy. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a mess, but it has several irritating bugs. Traversal is a little tricky. Like, there's a lot of stuff like this where you're on tree trunks and there's like marble slabs packed on top of each other, and it's kind of hard to tell, because you can't jump, so can I walk on this or not? And then it was unclear sometimes, but you would just like kind of clip into something and then fall off a cliff, kind of like in Demon Souls or the original Dark Souls, or you would I got stuck in the environment a couple of times, where I get stuck in between enemies a couple of times and you can't really roll through them. So, and it's clearly not intended to work that way. And then beyond that, there was one time at least that I went back to get my body. I was on my corpse run and I was trying to get a large number of souls. They're called tar in this game. A large amount of tar early in the game when it was very important, and it just wasn't there. And I looked it up, and that is a thing in this game, that happens. And I'm telling you, I knew exactly where I died. It was quite simple. It was quite early in the game, and it was gone, and I was pissed. And then there was another time, we'll talk about that later because it's not really a bug. But the bugs were rough. They were a little rough, especially like trying just to traverse and then falling off of a cliff that you shouldn't have fallen off of. That happened probably 3 or 4 times. So the game was pretty buggy in some parts. The second thing, and probably the more important thing, is that the gear / loot / level progression, the progression in this game in general, didn't really do it for me. There is something called tar in this game that's like souls, and you can use it to better your character, but you're not buying levels. You're buying abilities or passives, and that's cool. That's fine. That in itself is not a problem. But each of the shells that you get, they have their own, and there was a recurring problem that I had where I had a good amount of souls, tar, and glimpses, which is the other currency, and which is kind of like insight and Bloodborne a little bit, and like enough that if I lost it, it would be a big deal, but not enough to buy anything because everything was pretty expensive. So I found myself for large portions of the game running around with money that I did not want to lose, XP that I did not want to lose, but I couldn't buy anything with, especially earlier in the game, first half or so. And that was frustrating. So I just felt like I couldn't progress my character really. And then the other thing is, you start out... I beat this game with the weapon I started with. And I got a couple other weapons, but the problem is that by the time I got my second weapon, I had been in the game for a while, and I had already used some finite resources to level up that other weapon. And when I used both of them to compare them, and my original weapon was better, probably because of the small amount that I'd upgraded. Plus, I just liked the moveset better. And then by the time I found the second weapon, which was way later, I'd already put a lot of resources into upgrading my weapon, and I still liked the moveset better on the first one. So there wasn't really any loot progression at all. The only other loot or gear that you can find are these shells. And the first shell that you start off with is pretty garbage. But the very next one I found was the one I beat the game with, because it was really good. And, you know, the good thing is that this game is designed where you can kind of find any of those things at any time, because it's not linear at all. But the downside of that is, if you find the best shit early, which I didn't even find one of the shells, there's only a few, and the first one I found, I liked this one. I found another one. I was like, no, I don't like this one's stats as much. And so I just kept with that one. So there wasn't really any gear or loot progression in this game. Now, the developers would probably say something to the effect of, well, it's not really about that. You go in and you might get lucky because there's a lot of RNG involved, and you just happen to find the things that worked for you, and the first weapon you got happened to work for you, and that's good for you because it matched your playstyle. But for me personally, beating the final boss with the weapon I started with and the very first shell I found wasn't very satisfying. That aspect of the game was not very satisfying to me. I would have preferred that at least the first weapon be clearly not as good as the others, you know, or that at least the second weapon I find is maybe more interesting. But the first weapon is badass if you upgrade it. So there's really no reason to even the larger point that I'm trying to make is there's really you could just completely ignore all of those other parts of the game, all the other weapons, all the other shells after the very first one I found, and that's essentially what I did. I just kind of I tried them. I'm more comfortable with what I have. I'm happier with that. It does more damage. It has more life or whatever. I'm good with that. So so there were whole aspects of the game that they might as well not have put in there because I just ignored them. And the best Souls-likes that I've played, they are designed inherently to a point that you can't ignore them. I mean, if you're playing Dark Souls 2 and you're trying to beat this final boss with the first or second or even third weapon you find, good fucking luck. That's like you're doing some kind of special speed run online if you're even trying that. There's a progression there that makes sense, and you can upgrade your stuff, and then even after you've upgraded stuff to a certain point, then you're going to find something that's better anyway. Now, again, this is a much shorter game, but even games like Steel Rising and Thymesia, I thought had well, not really Thymesia, but Steel Rising and some other ones had some better progression. That's a tough thing for Souls-likes, I've found. A lot of Souls-likes have faltered in that. You'll find, even in Dark Souls, you'll find some weapon early in the game that you end up... in Elden Ring, the very first sword I found was the one I killed the final boss with. So, it's not uncommon, right? But it's still a negative for me. That's really it, though. And I think that the negatives are far outweighed by the positives. The level design, they fucking chef's kiss. They nailed it. It frustrated me sometimes because it was so confusing, but ultimately I really found that experience to be gratifying of trying to map out these levels in my mind because they were insane. The level design is some of the best I've seen in a non-FromSoft Souls-like. better than Lies of P, better than Steel Rising, better than Thymesia, better than any of the Souls-likes I played recently. So that was great. And then the boss fights they weren't the best, but they were good. They were definitely passable. The boss fights were decent. They had me sweating. But it did that thing where it got easier in the second half, and so I didn't really struggle with any of the later bosses because I had fully upgraded my weapon, my original weapon, and I had gotten good enough at the game at that point that I wasn't really struggling. The struggles really happened at the beginning. And then the combat is solid enough that it was fun throughout. It never got old. Right. So, great game. All right, so we've done it. Last order of business, Mortal Shell. It has been a joy. Thank you for allowing us to play you. This is now the last Souls-like that I really want to play. I've now beaten every Souls-like that's on my list. So, it's really going to be just new Souls-likes from here on out. There's one or two that I might go back to, but they're peripheral. I've beaten every notable Souls-like at this point. Except for the Lords of the Fallen games, because I hated both of them. But I tried them, at least. All right. Mortal Shell, it's been fun, but we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye! Thank you.